afternoon. My name is Denise Mananes. I'm the Associate Vice President for External Affairs for St. John's Riverside Hospital, and I welcome you to all today to our Riverside Talk presentation, Safety for Seniors, a Family Affair. Before we begin our program, I would like to acknowledge my team, my producers, Jason Latore, Media Production Manager in my department, Nancy Anabi, who is our Community Liaison, and Candace Cousins-Hopkins, our Associate Director of External Affairs. These three individuals make sure that we have great partnerships in the community and help us get this webinar out to our varied community all over the city of Yonkers and the Rivertown. So thank you to all of them. Today we have a speaker who is with us to discuss the topic of seniors, but before I introduce her, I do want to talk about our partners, our original partners, the Yonkers Neighborhood Naturally Occurring Retirement Community and the Yonkers Public Library, and our new partners, and there's quite a list of them, and they help us get the word out. Ashling Irish Community and Cultural Center, the Department of Veterans Services, the City of Yonkers, Ardsley Parks and Recreation, Ardsley Senior Center, Bronxville Community Center, the City of Yonkers, Community Baptist Church, Hastings Community Center, Irvington Community Center, Westchester Jewish Community Services, and Yonkers Pathways to Success. So thank you to all of them and welcome to our program today. Before we begin and I introduce our speaker, if there's anyone in our audience who would like to ask a question, feel free to enter that question into the Q&A in the webinar. And if your question has not been answered by the end of the webinar, I will be more than happy to pose that question to our speaker. So let's get right to the good stuff. And that is our speaker, Alexandra Woodruff, who is with us today, started her nursing career at Hospital for Special Surgery, the #1 orthopedic hospital in the world. During COVID, she worked as an RN coordinator of care at VNS Health, caring for the underserved populations of East Harlem. Alexandra joined St. John's in 2023 and is currently the nurse manager on 6 South, which is an inpatient medical surgical unit, and she's the manager of the float nurses as well. She is also the system lead for the Age-Friendly Health Systems Movement, an 18-month spread collaborative with the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. Alexandra is dedicated to improving care for the older adult and spreading age-friendly care throughout the St. John's health system. Alexandra received her Bachelor of Nursing Science from Thomas Jefferson University. She is currently earning a Master of Public Health at Columbia University. Certainly those are wonderful credentials, and I welcome you very much to our program, Alexandra. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here to talk about senior safety. You know, I feel like it's such an important topic and it just doesn't get talked about enough. So I'm very excited for this opportunity to have the conversation with you today.
That's wonderful, and I appreciate you for coming on and being brave enough to come on and talk about this. So let's dive right in. Let's start with a very basic question. As a senior person, what can that person do to take care of themselves? Let's just start with a basic.
Absolutely. So I love this. So first and foremost, I recommend to not only older adults, but to all adults, get a primary care provider if you don't already have one. So primary care providers are essential for your care. They're really at the center of everything that happens. So they're your first stop if you have health changes, you know, they oversee your medications. A good primary care provider really should review those medications with you at every visit. You know, they're the person when you have those changes, they can guide you to see the appropriate specialist. At a minimum, we recommend that you go for an annual visit every year with your primary care provider. You know, if you're experiencing health changes, obviously go see them first. You know, some primary care providers actually specialize in geriatrics. They're called geriatricians. So we do recommend them for older adults who may have more complex care. But for most people, just a standard PCP will do. What you want to make sure more than anything when you're looking for a primary care provider is that there's someone that, you know, it's easy to get a hold of. They're good communicators and they're able to see you quickly in case of illness. So PCP, that's number one. Number two, I recommend that older adults go and visit optometrists regularly. So again, at least once a year. As our bodies age, our eyes age too, right? And addressing vision changes is really essential to promoting safety and independence as an older adult. Poor vision can lead to a variety of negative outcomes. And what's more is that it creates an impression that an older adult may be older, more feeble than they actually are. So getting regular eye exams is really essential to maintaining safety and independence. And then, some other recommendations I have, these would be recommendations for anyone, not just an older adult, but whatever you can do to promote wellness and health. So exercise regularly. For an older adult, those are things, that would focus on balance and strength training. So things like yoga or Tai Chi that are gentle on the body, but can promote wellness. Okay. And then, of course, ensure that you get adequate nutrition and hydration. And, my very last recommendation, maybe even the most important, is that you really should schedule regular social interaction. So oftentimes as adults age, they become isolated. Regular engagement with family and friends will support mental and emotional health. It's important always to have a community around you, but especially as you age.
Wow. Okay, so you gave us the whole picture from a medical point of view, but I love that you added in the social interaction, because I do think that affects the physical and just if you're not feeling happy or content in your life, I think that does have physical ramifications, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so that's a very good opening, but let's talk about things like preventing infections and other illnesses. And we're going into flu and COVID season. We just did a webinar on flu and COVID vaccines. So, but they're not the only infections that are out there in the world. And so as a senior, maybe they're living alone, maybe they're living with another senior. How can they prevent an infection or getting another illness?
Great question. So I can't say enough about vaccines. As an older adult, there are really 4 vaccines that are recommended. So obviously that COVID vaccine you talked about, the flu vaccine every year will keep you safe, but then also pneumonia. You want to vaccinate against pneumonia and then vaccinate against shingles. So, we make these recommendations. These are recommended by the CDC, but I always suggest that you speak with your primary care provider first to make sure that these are appropriate for you. Right. And you can, in fact, get them through your primary care provider or at pretty much any local drugstore or pharmacy. So I really love that.
So just for our audience sake, shingles is something that can occur if someone had the chickenpox when they were children or adults. And
Correct.
This is the way it reappears as an older person. And so getting and shingles can lead to a lot of complications, is my understanding. So it would be very important. Obviously, pneumonia makes sense. One of the things we addressed in the COVID and flu vaccine webinar, which is coming out in the next day or so, is that there is a lot of press about vaccines now, and there's a lot of people who are kind of pushing back on the idea. But for seniors, the recommendation, and it was actually made by Dr. Harry Horan, who's our infectious disease director, that even though you may still get a case of the flu, or it may not be 100% protection, a case of COVID, you will have a much less severe case of it. And in the senior populations, these illnesses can have not only long-lasting consequences, but can have life and death consequences as well. Is that a fair statement?
That's exactly right. So what vaccines do at the most basic level is they prepare your body for infection. It's like a practice run, when you're preparing for a sport, you practice with your team before the actual game. So that's what vaccines do. They help your body practice in case of infection so that when you do get that infection, it's going to be a lot less. You will be safer and healthier if your body's had the time to prepare adequately.
Okay. So you had mentioned in your opening that one of the things that you recommend for seniors is exercise. And obviously, whether that's walking or Tai Chi or something gentle on the body, because many seniors do have some form of arthritis. But for me, it has a bigger issue, and I wanted to talk about, because you mentioned balance. How can a senior prevent falls?
Oh, that's such a great question. So, for the older adult, falls are a huge consideration. I want to frame up our conversation with just a few statistics because I really think it sets the tone and why it's so important. So I looked this up on the CDC website, and they said that every year 3 million ED visits are related to an older adult falling. Can you believe that? 3 million.
No.
That's huge, right?
That's huge.
I know. And then 1 out of 10 falls. So 1 out of 10 of those ED visits result in a serious injury. And then even more astounding is that every year, 1 in 4 adults will fall, but less than half will tell their doctor. So I mean, that is.
Ooh.
Right, I know, it's really amazing. So the reason I share these statistics is because, I want to open up a conversation about falls. I have seen from my own experience that there's a lot of shame and fear around admitting that you've fallen, and there really shouldn't be. It's important to be honest and communicate openly about the falls that you've had. If we can identify a problem, we can find a solution. So I always urge people to be open about admitting if they have fallen. So let's get to the heart. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, so I find that very interesting, the idea that someone is ashamed, but I have to believe it's because if they bring it up, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if they bring it up, they are admitting that maybe there's something wrong and they don't really want to go down that path. Is that something that you think is tied into it?
I absolutely believe so. And I think, as older adults age, they want to maintain their independence. I think there's a fear that if they say they've fallen, they're going to be placed immediately in a nursing home and they can't live alone anymore. And that's not the solution, right? There's many other steps before that. So let's talk about some of the things that we can do then to prevent falls.
Prevent them, yeah.
Absolutely. So number one, use an assistive device. So if you have, been evaluated by a primary care provider or a physical therapist and they recommend a cane or a walker, use it. Okay, that's the single most important thing you can do to keep yourself safe. You want to make sure your environment's safe. So make sure that you have adequate lighting and that it's easy to turn it on to reach the light switch. Make sure, if you have rugs on your floor, that they're secured to the floor so they're not going to bunch and you're not going to trip over them. Make sure that you have railings on your stairway. One thing people often don't think about is if you have pets. So I'm a huge pet lover. I have 2 pets at home, but sometimes they're racing around in front of me as I'm trying to walk, and my God, they've almost taken me and taken me down. I've almost fallen down my own stairs, and I'm in my 30s. So it's really important that if you're able to secure them, you do, but at the very least, just be aware of where they are when you're ambulating. And then, of course, 80% of falls actually happen in the bathroom. So let's talk about some things specifically related to the bathroom that we can do to keep people safe. So number one, install grab bars in your bathroom. So those are the bars either by the side of your toilet or in the shower. And then, of course, when you're taking a shower, there's really no need to stand the whole time. We recommend using a shower chair so you can be seated. If you have a fixed nozzle on your shower, you're able to switch that to a handheld device so you can sit while you're bathing yourself, really still get clean, Of course, we recommend non-slip surfaces. So that's both inside the shower stall and then, on the floor of your bathroom. And then, of course, I recommend this to every older adult who feels they might be at risk of falling. But, make sure if you're able to, make sure you have a medical alert system. I think it's such a wonderful way to keep yourself safe. And that would either be, a bracelet or a necklace that you wear so that when you've fallen, hopefully that doesn't happen, but if you've fallen, you're able to get help when you need it. So those are just some things we can do to keep ourselves safe.
That's all great advice. But I kind of want to switch from talking about what the senior can do, because many times there are caretakers involved, and whether that's a visiting nurse or whether that's a family member or a spouse or what have you. How do you care for that person? Obviously, some of these are very practical tips and they can implement those to ensure safety. But oftentimes they're in a position where they're not making traction with the person they're trying to take care of. So in that instance, what's your recommendation for a caretaker?
Absolutely. So, as an older adult ages, the goal is, as their caregiver, to really help them maintain their independence. We want them to be independent, living life to the fullest. Your role as a caregiver is going to be largely supportive. So an older adult may need help getting groceries, prepping for food, getting to doctor's appointments. You really want to help them with their activities of daily living. And if you're not able to help them, you just want to be able to connect them with the resources that can help them. Another responsibility that I think isn't often talked about for caregivers is that you need to have open and honest conversations about long-term care planning. So you're there to support an older adult, but if you don't know their wishes, what they want as they age, how can you really support them? So I always recommend having these open conversations, asking them questions like, how do you see yourself aging? What are your priorities? What's the perfect vision of aging for you? What does that look like? And then, if that's not what ends up happening, what's plan B? So I think it's really important to have those conversations and ask maybe some tough questions, but the long-term effect of that is that you will be able to help your older adult, age gracefully and with dignity.
Yeah, so in line with that idea of having those tough conversations, how do you know, there's a two-parter here. How do you know when someone should no longer live alone? And or how do you know when someone should no longer drive their car? And those are, not about living independent lives anymore, right? Those are the, I think, very hard for even for children to look at their aging parents and have that conversation. Okay, mom, it's time to give me the car keys. So what are the clues that people should be looking for that say maybe it's time now for us to have this conversation about living alone or driving the car?
Absolutely. So, I always approach a question like this with sensitivity, right? It is such a difficult conversation to have. So as far as living alone, some of the things that you should be on the lookout for, can an older adult take care of their basic needs? Are they cooking? Are they cleaning their house? Are they able to bathe and perform hygiene? Are they taking their meds appropriately? It's important you get into their environment. Is it clean and tidy? Were they a very tidy person and all of a sudden the laundry's piled up and this is not the norm for them? Are there unopened piles of mail? Are there unpaid bills? I think observing their physical appearance as well is helpful. Are they wearing the same clothes day after day? Are they disheveled when they used to be polished? One of the things I always say to be on the lookout for too, do you see bruises or abrasions on their arms or legs? This could indicate, possibly that they're falling and not talking about it, and or just that they're having balance issues and they're like bumping into things as they walk. So if you start to see some of these clues, it's time to have a conversation about, is it still safe to be at home? And then that second part of the question, so when should they stop driving a car? I have to share my own experience with this. This happened when I was a little girl. I mean, I must have been 8 years old, but I remember it so vividly. So when my mom and her brothers had the conversation with my grandfather that it was time for him to stop driving. So I get so emotional when I talk about this. So my grandfather, it was an amazing man. He's a World War II veteran, tough as nails. I mean, as tough as they come, never emotional. When they had that conversation with him that it was time to take the keys away, he literally started crying. I mean, it was such a difficult and vulnerable moment for him. And, I think about that anytime I speak on this subject, and I try to always promote sensitivity around it. So let's talk about some of the things you should be on the lookout for. So, if an older adult's driving, and they're hitting curbs or they're having difficulty parking, if they're struggling to change lanes safely, if there's delayed response time, if there's a nervousness and they're sitting really close to the steering wheel. You can be on the lookout for dents or scrapes on their car, on the side of their garage. If you see any of that, it's time to have a conversation. And again, I can't say it enough, approach these conversations with sensitivity and openness and empathy. This is one of the most difficult topics to talk about. And
it really is.
Oh my gosh, it is. It's so important that you give them grace and time. Be specific when you have this conversation. Be specific about your observations. So like, hey mom, I noticed this happened. Really shy away from making blanket statements like you always do this or you never do that. Be very specific and use a lot of I feel statements like, I feel concerned for your safety. And I think if you focus it around the subject of safety, that's really most meaningful because it's not just about the safety of the other drivers on the road. It's about the safety of your loved one. You want to keep them safe as your caregiver. So that's what I recommend for those conversations. Not easy, but important.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I thank you for sharing that because, yeah, that's a tough one. And I could feel it, So let's turn the conversation to a senior in the hospital. Why is it so? I think a lot of people don't understand this, but there is always a concern of having a senior citizen in the hospital too long. So why is it necessary for us to not obviously to rush somebody who needs medical care in a hospital setting, but why is there some urgency to not have someone just stay in the hospital?
Absolutely. So an older adult is at a very high increased risk for infection when they're in the hospital. At the most basic level, what do hospitals do, right? So they treat sick people. In order to do that, they get all the sick people together in a building, right? So just by virtue of the fact that an older adult is in very close proximity to many other sick people, they're at that increased risk, as is any other patient that comes to the hospital. When you couple that with, as an older adult ages, their immune system weakens. It's just a natural part of the aging process. When you put the two of those things together, they are really at a high risk for infection when they're in the hospital. So I always recommend, if you can, really remove your older adult from the hospital, even if it's to a rehab facility instead of home, just get them out of here as quickly as possible. And it's not just infection related. For the mental health of an older adult, it's much better to not be in a hospital. So they don't, any patient doesn't sleep well in the hospital. We have to go in and check their vitals. There's machines going off. There's people working around you. I know for myself, when I don't sleep well, I don't think right. My brain doesn't work like it normally does. And having an older adult in a hospital, a setting that they're not used to, can lead to confusion and delirium and agitation. So it's really, really in their best interest to get out of the hospital, for sure.
Okay. So there's something in, there's a one point as a patient in the hospital that has always been a bit of a confusion, and that is understanding the medications, yours and the hospital's, the way that medications are dealt with. So my understanding is that when you come in, the medications that you would normally take at home you're not taking. The hospital is responsible for administering those medications. Is that a fair statement?
That's absolutely right. So when a patient comes into the hospital, we get a list of the medications that they take. That's a combination of information from the patient and their caregivers, and then what we already have in the system from their last visit. So a doctor will go through and just make sure that everything's up to date, there aren't any medications interacting with each other, and that the medication an older adult is on is appropriate for their diagnosis. One of the things we do in the hospital, which is particular to St. John's, and I think it's such a wonderful thing, is that we offer consults with our pharmacy. So if an older adult has questions about their medications, they can actually get a pharmacist to come to the bedside and really take the time and go through each medication, explain what it is, why they're taking it, what the side effects are. It's such a great program that we have going on here. So I always recommend that to our older adults and to any patient. And then, when you're taking medications, always ask questions. You cannot ask too many questions. Our hospital loves to teach. That's what we do. Our nurses love our patients. They love to tell them, about the medications, why they're on it. I mean, we're here to make your lives easier. So I always recommend asking questions, and, don't feel afraid to ask a question a second time. I'm in medicine and I don't get everything the first time. I write stuff down. I make my husband come to my appointments and listen to me. It's hard to get all that information at once. So I always recommend write it down, have someone else listening in, and then ask a million questions. That is what we're here for.
That's great. And then finally, for this portion of our talk, the community resources, which is interesting for both the patient and their caregivers, and getting that information is usually on discharge. Can you kind of just give us a walkthrough of how discharge would normally go and what kind of information they would get at discharge?
Absolutely. So as far as resources for discharge, so our hospital starts your discharge planning the moment that you come here. It's not because we want you to leave. We actually love our patients, but we just want to be prepared. We want you to be prepared for the next level. So we have an extremely wonderful case management social work team. They set patients and their families up with resources on discharge. If a patient's on antibiotics or they need wound care, we'll send in a home care nurse to help out. I think that in addition to that, one of the best resources that we use is actually the Yonkers Office for the Aging. They have a robust array of resources and services they can offer. They have meal delivery, grocery availability, setting up transportation and housing, help at home. They even have support groups. I mean, they really do it all. So if there's something that, our case management social work team can't quite hit the mark on, the Yonkers Office for the Aging is the answer.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for that. So now I want to turn our conversation a little bit about to what you have sort of spearheaded or reinitiated in our system, and that is age-friendly care at St. John's, and what our current status is. What is it? So let's start with what is it?
Absolutely. So the age-friendly movement is a movement dedicated to geriatrics developed by the Institute for Healthcare Improvement and the John A. Hartford Foundation. And its goal is really to put the older adult at the center of their care. So it's guided by a set of 4 principles called the 4 M's. So what matters, medication, mentation, and mobility. And Denise, I often get the question, well, what is mentation? That just means your mental status, right? So are you alert and oriented? Is there any depression, anxiety, just where you are mentally? So by using these 4 M's, we assess them and then we act on them. And we're really better able to meet the needs of the older adult. So one thing that I want to shout out, because it's such an incredible opportunity, is that St. John's was actually chosen to be part of an 18-month collaborative with the IHI. So the goal of this is to spread age-friendly care throughout our system. Right now, both of our hospitals are level 2 campuses, and that is the highest level you can get. And that is because of our commitment to the age-friendly movement. So it's really an incredible opportunity, and it has tremendous impact for our patients.
So that's very interesting. So when you talk about the assessment, so tell me how does this work? The patient is in on a unit, and what happens? You don't see all the patients, but how does the care get delivered? How did this assessment occur?
Absolutely. So it's both part of the admission assessment and then the ongoing assessments of both the nurses and the nursing assistants and the physicians and everyone that comes in to touch the patient. So we'll ask a series of questions. When a patient's admitted, we point blank ask them, what matters to you? Do you have practical concerns, financial concerns, spiritual concerns? What is it that's important and how can we help you address those issues? And then, mobility. We involve our physical therapist. We do an evaluation for our patients. How are they walking? What can we do to help you meet your needs? We do the same for mentation and of course medication. We are so big about our medication education, like I spoke about earlier. So it's both at point of entry into the hospital and ongoing every day. And in fact, we even have a spot on the whiteboard of every patient. So in the room against the wall, there's going to be a whiteboard. Each patient has one of these. And it even says what matters, and we'll write it out so that everyone that comes in the room knows what's important to the patient.
Very nice. That's very nice. Have you gotten any feedback from a patient, or is there a patient story that sort of sticks out in your mind as to, you know, showing the impact of this program?
Absolutely. So recently we had an older adult female that came in. She had fallen while ambulating to the bathroom at night. We talked about the importance of making sure you stay safe earlier. And we used the 4 M's. We assessed her. So, you know, mentation, no issues there. She was alert and oriented. Medication, we did have pharmacy come up and do a consult, so no issues there as well. We did a mobility assessment and we realized that she really needed an assistive device and she wasn't using it. She was a little resistant to having to rely on a walker. So we got PT involved, you know, they did the eval. We changed the way that we look to provide care and you know, we increased the frequency and duration of her physical therapy. We got social work involved. We realized that when going home, she's going to need some resources. You know, she'll need VNS services, a nurse to come in and check on her. Physical therapy, obviously, maybe occupational therapy and potentially a home health aide. So we set that up for her. And then when we assess what matters most, we found out that her granddaughter's getting married next month and she so desperately wanted to be there. She was worried that because she couldn't walk very well, she wouldn't get there. And, you know, through coming together as an interdisciplinary team, we were really able to meet her where she was at, you know, to get her the resources she needed. And I actually did the discharge phone call myself. That's one of the great things of my job is I get to check in on patients once they're home. And I'm happy to report that she is thriving. She reports feeling safer at home. And she told me that she is looking forward to going to her granddaughter's wedding with her walker. So that was a huge win for us.
That's
it doesn't
amazing.
have to be. I know.
I love that.
It's so heartwarming.
I love that.
I know. Great win for us.
Because after all, if we're not here to help our community, then why are we here? This is what we are. This is who we are. So that's a beautiful story. Yes. I love that. I love that. Before we, there is a resource we're going to talk about in a second, but is there any other advice for our seniors and for their caregivers that you want to share?
You know, I just want to recap a few of the things that I said. So if you take nothing else with you, remember, get a primary care provider. That's one of the most important things you can do for yourself. Make sure you get vaccinated. That really keeps you safe and healthy. And then the third thing is just don't be afraid to have those tough conversations. That's, you know, what it is. It's part of the aging process, and you can age better if you're unafraid to talk about the things that are happening.
That's great advice. That's great advice. So now, can you share some information about the My Health checklist? And for, well, I'll wait till after you share that if you want to talk about it. What is it?
Absolutely. So I'm going to hold up a pamphlet here, and we are going to make this available afterwards. This will be a posted resource for anyone who's interested in using this. So I just love this. This is a pamphlet that you go through. You can do it either independently or with your caregiver, but the older adult's going to fill this out. So there's a series of questions around the 4 M's like we talked about. And it's not just, you know, what's your mobility, but what do you think's going well? What are things that could be better? What questions or concerns do you have? And they give examples, you know, going to the bathroom at night, going to see my friends. What this does is it functions as a way, as a facilitator of communication, I would say.
Yeah, it's a way to start the conversation, those tough conversations. That's great.
It's great. It's almost like a passport, right? You take this with you when you go to your doctor's appointments. So what I recommend is that you fill this out. I think that the older adult should fill it out first. And then if they have a caregiver who's interested in the process, they can kind of circle back and work on some of this together. And, you know, you don't have to fill this out every time you go to a doctor's appointment. You can fill it out once and update it as things happen. But it's really a wonderful way to kind of get all your ducks in a row. You know, like I mentioned, for anyone at any age, it's difficult to remember to ask all the questions when you're at your doctor's appointment. And this way, you know, you've got it written down. You can literally hand this to your doctor and say, hey, here's what's going on and how can we work to address what matters most to me. So I really can't recommend this enough. I think every older adult, honest to God, every person, whether they're older or younger, should use this. I think it's a really great resource to organize your ideas and communicate what's important to you.
Okay, and so for our audience, I want you to know that that is available when this webinar gets posted onto our YouTube channel. That checklist will be a link in that, and you can look for that on our social media channels, which will be posted, I think, in the next 24 hours. It might be tomorrow night. I'm not exactly sure, but it's within the next full 24 hours. So look for that My Health Checklist, and always remember you can contact us, and I'll give you that in a minute. But Alex, thank you so much for being with us today. I really admire your passion for what you do. You are one of our stars. We love to talk with you about all of these topics. Your care for the patient is really evident in everything that you say. So thank you. Thank you for being with us and giving us your time. And to the audience, I would like to thank you again for being with us. And let's go to our contact. So anyone in the audience who has a question about today's program or would like further information, please call the main number of the hospital. That's 964-4444 and ask for me, Denise Mananes, or a better, more direct route probably would be to email me at info@riversidehealth.org. That actually comes directly to my inbox as well. And if you have a question for Alex, I am happy to get that answer and get it back to you. If you need a primary care physician, as Alex said, we have a wonderful physician referral line. We have it both English and Spanish. The English line is 964-4DOC, that's 4DOC. And the Spanish line is 964-4245. Obviously, those are both 914 numbers. And always email, for those of you who like your email, it's findadoc@riversidehealth.org. So once again, to my audience and to Alex, thank you for joining us for another in this series of Riverside Talk, and we will see you again very soon.